Imagine waking up one morning to find that your neighbor has been completely reduced to ashes. Her body burned so completely, it looked like it had come straight out of a crematorium. But here's the twist. Her chair is gone. Her skull has shrunk to the size of a teacup, and yet the rest of the room is untouched. No raging fire, no destruction, not even a burnt newspaper lying just a few feet away. This isn't a horror movie. This really happened in 1951 to a woman named Mary Reeser in St. Petersburg, Florida, in the summer of 1951. The victim was a quiet, elderly woman named Mary Reeser. She was 67 years old, lived alone in a modest apartment, and was, by all accounts, an ordinary person. Yet her death became anything but ordinary. What investigators discovered in her apartment defied logic, science, and common sense. Mary Reeser's body had been almost completely reduced to ash, cremated, essentially, inside her own home. But the strangest part? The rest of the apartment was largely untouched. Furniture nearby was barely scorched. A newspaper sitting in the next room hadn't even burned. How could a fire powerful enough to reduce a human body to ash leave the surrounding room almost intact? This is the story of Mary Reeser, also known as the Cinder Lady, a mystery that continues to puzzle scientists and conspiracy theorists more than 70 years later. Let's understand who Mary Reeser was. Born in 1884, Mary Hardy Reeser lived a quiet life. She was a widow at the time of her death, having lost her husband years earlier. By 1951, she lived alone in a small apartment in St. Petersburg, Florida, where she was close to family, including her son, Dr. Richard Reeser. Mary was not famous, not wealthy, and not controversial. She was described as a kind, gentle woman in declining health. She had some issues with mobility and reportedly took sleeping pills to rest at night. On July 2nd, Mary's landlady arrived at her apartment early in the morning to deliver a telegram. When she knocked on the door and received no answer, she noticed something unusual. The doorknob was extremely hot. Alarmed, she alerted the authorities. Firefighters and police forced their way inside, and what they found would haunt them forever. The chair where Mary had been sitting the night before was almost completely burned. In the middle of the ashes lay the remains of Mary Reeser, or what was left of her. Her body had been almost entirely incinerated, reduced to a fine ash. Only her left foot remained, still wearing a black satin slipper. A portion of her backbone and her skull were also found. The skull, strangely, appeared to have shrunk, described by one investigator as being the size of a teacup. This detail would later become one of the most bizarre and debated aspects of the case. Yet what truly baffled investigators was not just Mary's condition, but the apartment itself. The fire seemed to have been incredibly intense, but also strangely contained. The walls were covered with a greasy residue. Nearby plastic items had melted from the heat, but other flammable objects in the room were untouched. A pile of newspapers just a few feet away showed no sign of fire damage. How could such a selective fire occur? Police and fire investigators were stunned. This wasn't a normal house fire. In fact, there was no evidence of a fire spreading through the apartment at all. The FBI became involved, analyzing the ashes and sending reports. They confirmed what everyone already suspected. The body had burned at an extremely high temperature, hot enough to destroy bones. Normally, such temperatures are only reached in professional crematoriums, where it can take hours of intense, consistent heat to fully cremate a body. But Mary Reeser had been sitting in her living room. There was no furnace, no obvious fuel source, no massive fire. How could her body have burned so completely? Local police suggested she may have fallen asleep while smoking a cigarette. Perhaps her clothing ignited, and in her drugged or weakened state, she couldn't react. But even if this were true, cigarette fires do not burn hot enough to reduce a human body to ash. And if such an intense blaze occurred, why didn't it spread and engulf the entire apartment? The case baffled experts. Newspaper headlines across the country screamed of spontaneous human combustion. Scientists dismissed the idea as superstition, but privately, many admitted they had no clear answer. Over the years, many theories have been proposed to explain Mary Reeser's death. 1. Smoking accident. The simplest theory is that Mary fell asleep with a lit cigarette and her clothing caught fire. Because she was wearing a flammable nightgown and had taken sleeping pills, she may not have woken in time. This could have created a wick effect, where human fat feeds the flames like a candle. Critics argue that while this explains the localized burn, it doesn't fully account for the near-total cremation or the bizarre shrinking of the skull. 2. The Wick effect. The Wick effect became the most widely accepted scientific explanation. In this theory, clothing acts as a wick, while melted body fat acts as the fuel. The fire essentially turns the body into a candle that burns slowly but intensely. This would explain why the fire was localized and why the rest of the apartment wasn't destroyed. However, even this explanation struggles to account for the complete completeness of the cremation in Mary's case. 3. Spontaneous human combustion. Some believe Mary's death was a case of spontaneous human combustion, the idea that a person can suddenly ignite from within, perhaps due to unusual chemical reactions in the body. This idea has been around for centuries, appearing in literature and folklore, but has never been scientifically proven. Skeptics argue there is no mechanism by which a body could spontaneously catch fire without an external source. 4. Paranormal or unexplained forces. As with many mysteries, some have suggested paranormal causes, energy fields, curses, or other supernatural explanations. These are not supported by evidence, but the sheer strangeness of the case keeps such theories alive in popular imagination. The Mary Reeser case became a media sensation. Newspapers dubbed her the Cinder Lady. Articles debated whether spontaneous combustion was real. Scientists gave interviews expressing skepticism, but none could give a satisfying answer. For ordinary people, the story was terrifying. If Mary Reeser could burn to ash in her own home without explanation, could it happen to anyone? The case also influenced popular culture. It has been referenced in books about spontaneous combustion, in paranormal TV shows, and even in fictional works exploring mysterious deaths. Today, most forensic experts lean toward the Wick effect as the explanation for Mary Reeser's death. In 1998, experiments conducted for the BBC demonstrated how a clothed pig carcass could indeed burn in a similar fashion, supporting the Wick theory. Still, questions remain. The strange shrinking of Mary's skull, the intensity of the fire, and the selective burning of her body versus the room are details that fuel ongoing debate. Mary Reeser's death remains one of the most famous cases linked to the idea of spontaneous human combustion. Whether you accept the Wick effect, believe in a rare natural phenomenon, or lean toward paranormal explanations, one thing is certain: her case is deeply unsettling and deeply mysterious. Mary Reeser was an ordinary woman whose name has been forever tied to one of history's most chilling unsolved puzzles. More than 70 years later, her story continues to fascinate, frighten, and remind us of how much we still don't understand about life and death.